Hi, everybody. Let me sort of set things up a little bit here. I want to talk about storytelling, and I want to talk about my own journey as a storyteller, and how I've tried to use some innovative and strange, sometimes successful, sometimes not successful ways to reach, to hold on to find this kind of ever-changing audience out there. And then I want to talk a little bit about my own role as a storyteller and how I see part of that role as being using narrative to create and promote positive change in the world. But I wanted to start, I've heard now a couple times on this stage the phrase that nobody knows anything. And I think, in Hollywood that is, the truth is, that phrase has never been more true than it is now. And in some ways, it's actually our stock and trade in Hollywood. It's what we do best. We don't know anything. And it explains a lot of things. It explains why two people in a garage somewhere can create a kind of a crappy video of a talking orange and get 200 million, 300 million hits. It explains why a guy like me, who has never read a comic book in his entire life, can create a genre superhero show with the title Heroes, which is kind of a ridiculous title, sort of audacious, and find an audience of 76 million people around the globe, as Gideon said. And then follow that with a show, a very personal show called Touch that attracts an international huge star like Kiefer Sutherland, an A-list director, and then struggles to find an audience. And so this idea of not knowing anything, this concept of not knowing anything, actually, it actually is the great democratizer. It's the great equalizer of the business that we work in. And it keeps storytelling this mercurial, strange career. And the only thing that I really have come to know about this is through my own exploration of the audience and in trying to reach them, as I said, and trying to hold on to them. And therein lies madness in a certain way. Now, it wasn't always this way. Reaching an audience used to be a very simple thing. And this slide, which I love, sort of says it all. It's as though we used to just watch things out of a magical box. The content was created months before people saw it, then pushed out into the world, and then consumed in silence by this audience when and where and how the broadcasters wanted it to be consumed. And the only feedback that we got was sort of an anecdotal reaction, up or down, kind of thumbs up or down, based on the Nielsen ratings. And that was basically it. And this was pretty much the world that I was raised in the 60s, where I was brought up with a certain amount of social consciousness that I thought I was going to be able to say something and do something in the world to make it a better place. And I'd always wrestled with big questions of meaning of life and why are we here and how are we all connected. And so much so that I actually became a religious studies major in college. And like my father would say, there wasn't a lot of buck in that racket. So fortunately, I had to figure out how to do something else. And I was interested in cinematography, interested in photography. And I ended up going to film school at the famed USC Film School. And when I got out, like a lot of my friends, I wrote a script to try to get an agent and try to get ahead. And from that from that script, I got an agent. From that agent, I got 100 meetings, and from that 100 meetings, I got my first job writing for a talking car on a show called Knight Rider, which, as you could see, is putting the religious studies major to good use. But it was a foot in the door, and to be really honest, I haven't stopped working as a writer this was 29 years ago. And at that time, I took any job that I could get. I started working, I never stopped taking jobs. And I took anything that came my way. If it was a TV movie, a horror film, a teenage comedy, a disease of the week movie, I would write anything. I even made myself a business card which is completely ridiculous because nobody in Hollywood, no writer has a business card in Hollywood. But I made a business card, sort of as a joke, that had a little cartoon character on it with a light bulb over its head, and it said, "Tim Kring, professional writer, I'll write anything." And I'd hand it out to people. And while it was sort of a pathetic thing and a sort of a joke, it was also, strangely, metaphorically true of who I was and what my career was all about at the time. So, I juggled these jobs for years at a time. And I finally came to a place where I actually had to make a decision between one job or another. And I was completely paralyzed by this because I had no skill set in making decisions. And I started to think, well, I should have some sort of a way that I can discern what I want to do, some kind of true north guiding star that I could look at, a unifying theory of why I was a writer. But I couldn't figure out what a teen comedy had to do with a Disease of the Week movie. I just couldn't find the unifying theme in all of it. And thankfully, there were a few things that came my way, or that changed the world, actually, that changed also the way I started thinking of myself as a writer. One of them was, it was the year 2001, and I had a show just at the beginning of the show called Crossing Jordan. We were just starting production when 9/11 happened, and we took one day off of production, stumbled back in the next day, and I remember being struck by just how strange it was to be creating this make-believe world where on a fake stage with people basically, saying words that weren't theirs, and when there was so much suffering in the world. And I really was struck by it, and I decided that I would try and say something about it. I didn't really know what I wanted to say. I had no, nothing I wanted to preach about it. I just wanted to say something. And I ended up writing an episode of the show that was about sort of a group of disparate characters whose lives are all connected by what seems like random events, but ends up not being random at all. And this one episode, after I ended up seeing it, I realized that inside of that was this theme that I was actually kind of looking for, the idea of interconnectivity. And it turns out that this one episode of television was kind of a blueprint for the next dozen years or so of my career. And that combined with another, not an event, but actually a reality that was setting in, and that was that the audience that I was writing for on network TV was starting to erode, and they were starting to go to all these different platforms, the internet and mobile and video games and all of that. And so I realized that I needed to start, along with a couple of other people that were talking a lot about this, we needed to start thinking about, multi-platform storytelling, a way to reach an audience where they actually were. And I think, everybody, understands this, but I'll just go basically through the whole idea. That the traditional model was this linear idea of creating a story, then writing a script, and it becomes a TV show. And maybe things exist in an extension if you can find them the time and the money to do it. The way that we started thinking about it was to create a story world where the story lives at the center, and you build the extensions out of the DNA of the story so that part of them live in various platforms, and together it all makes up the whole of using the entire buffalo, as they say. And what great multi-platform storytelling does is it creates an idea where the audience can actually participate in a meaningful way. They actually feel like they're a part of this giant narrative. The audiences are then rewarded for participating, usually through knowledge of the show. Like fandom is based on your awareness and your knowledge of a show that you love, and so you're rewarded by that. All great multi-platform storytelling tells the same story, meaning that it all contributes to forming this entire mythology or canon of a narrative. And all the platforms have to tell story in a unique way, meaning that it's not good enough to take a $3 million television show and stick it onto a 2.5-inch screen of a mobile phone. You need to use the attributes of that mobile device in ways that are built into that device. That device knows where your friends are, and it has apps, and it has GPS and all of that. So tell story in a way that's unique to the device. They all have to be accessible, and of course they all build community, which is the whole idea. They all obviously have to entertain. And this is all done through and made possible through these new technologies that make storytelling more personal, where you can take it with you, and more social, where you can bring along your friends, more interactive, and clearly more mobile by the use of everybody's mobile devices that we see nowadays. And this all coalesced, this idea of interconnectivity, these two ideas of sort of interconnectivity and multi-platform storytelling, really coalesced in my show Heroes, which I think everybody who saw that show knows that it was a show about a disparate set of characters who come together to save the world, and there was a hidden message underneath it about hope and interconnectivity, and a postmodern idea of who a hero is. It could be literally the person next door, or the cheerleader that you dismiss, that sort of thing. We told story in every way that we possibly could, and we created this giant world of narrative that extended across all these various platforms in order to reach the audience. We had online comics and web content and fan-generated fiction that filled out the story for us, video games, print. We had magazines and novels and all sorts of things that went along with the show. We had alternate reality documentaries and websites and all these ways that you could dive into this deep, deep world, and mobile content. And I started to realize that there was this very dynamic relationship that was forming with my audience. It was no longer that one-way street, it was now a two-way street where they could talk back, and I could talk to them, they could talk to us. And I started to think about what the power of that was and how to harness that audience and use it for something. And this is a video to sort of describe some of that thought process. Heroes was designed to be a multi-platform universe that could actually connect to the audience where they lived. I started to think about the kind of show that would capture a zeitgeist. How do these characters from different parts of the world come together to do something great? It was not just the size and scale of the show and the big, broad canvas that we had. The part that really connected the audience was this underlying message of hope and interconnectivity, and this wish fulfillment that even the most ordinary among us could be destined for something great. In order to reach this audience, we had to tell story where they lived on multiple platforms. We started allowing that fan base to create content, to push content to us, and it was really at that time that the light bulb went off for me. Wouldn't it be amazing if we could take that idea and actually roll it out into the real world? You actually became a part of the narrative. Conspiracy for Good really came from the genesis of having created a mass culture phenomenon. So this idea really was kind of solidified by, in my mind, in a really visual way when I saw the audience react to this at Comic-Con. I don't know whether any of you have had the rare and strange privilege of going to Comic-Con, but it's a bizarre, fan conference or convention that people come from all over the place to. This is a video of people showing up to an event that, for our fans, we brought the cast, showed some clips, and 7,000 people showed up, screaming fans. And I got to thinking, this audience is not one that's easily reached by brands and by philanthropic organizations, but they are enormously powerful in their ability to reach one another and to connect to passionately to an idea. And we started to think about this concept of social benefit storytelling, the ability for people's participation inside of a story to actually end up being responsible for real world results. And that's when I got to thinking about how to connect this idea of a large scale narrative with the power of like multi-user online gaming and social networking and all of that, and to create a narrative around it. So came up with something called the Conspiracy for Good. And the Conspiracy for Good is a secret society that has existed for 2,000 years quietly hiding beneath the surface, in the shadows, and secretly responsible for all of the major philanthropic, political, philosophical, even technological advancements of the last 2,000 years. You just didn't realize it. You were too dumb to know that it was there. Well, but it was hidden, and you can see that it was there if you look. And the modern iteration of this still exists, and we created this idea that the conspiracy for good is an immersive social movement that inspires people through story, gaming, and human connection to generate positive change in the world. And so what we did was we created this pilot, a kind of David and Goliath story that about a school teacher in Zambia who wants to build a library for her kids, only to discover that there's an evil bad guy who's built this pipeline in the middle of the village. And through the help of a big brand, we actually pulled together enough of a budget and a whole bunch of really smart people, and went out and made this incredibly ambitious and unique multi-platform pilot, where we took a cause. In this case, it was a cause called Room to Read, which builds libraries in underdeveloped parts of the world. And we created a narrative that lived all around the participants, starting with it lasted for about 3.5 months, and it started with a 3-month alternate reality game that appeared online and on mobile casual games that you connected to, and we had 130 people working on it in 5 different countries. It was a very ambitious project where the clues to the narrative were all around you, in the music you listened to, on the billboards that you saw on your way to work. The clues were hidden everywhere. And the first thing that we did to launch this thing was we introduced the world to our bad guy. And our villain was an evil multinational corporation called Blackwell Briggs. And if you kind of think of sort of a Halliburton meets, I don't know, BP or something like that, they were involved in all things evil. And we created an entire social presence. We had websites and commercials, and we had a Twitter campaign where one of our early followers was Karl Rove, of all people, who wrote how eager he was to see what they were up to. Kind of proving that all bad guys find one another eventually. And the face of our evil corporation was a guy named Sir Ian Briggs. And what I'm about to show you is just about 30 seconds of a clip that it was a video that was never meant to be found by the audience, except for that we leaked it out to the audience on Pirate Bay. It was an 8-minute promotional video made for the members of Parliament to convince them to vote for something called the Private Surveillance Public Security Act. And this just gives you an example of the kind of production value that we were going after.
You have the power, the right, the obligation to make a difference. And we ask that you give our one world a chance. Our world. Your choice.
So this, it was a kind of a big, audacious and goofy kind of idea. But what it did was it started the spark of a tiny little story, this David and Goliath story, that we began to leak out onto the internet in these very small, kind of weird ways. An example is this. You would take something like a photograph and put it onto a site that fans would find. And they'd realize that there was a Morse code on this, somewhere in this. So obviously they'd go and find a translator, and they'd realize that there was a clue there. The badge is the key, and so they'd click on the badge, and a hidden message would be found, and the audience would very quickly crowdsource this and discover that these are coordinates. In this case, coordinates to some place in a strange city somewhere in Northern Europe that turned out to be Stockholm, where we took and hid some documents that were actually Blackwell-Briggs secret documents that 3 months later would be used to bring down this evil corporation as part of this narrative. And this is a video from the participants themselves finding this and discovering this. And like I said, these documents would actually become part of the narrative later on.
Pink scroll.
So let me show you a little sizzle reel that explains a little bit more about what we did.
Be on your guard.
In 2010, London witnessed the global launch of The Conspiracy for Good, a new form of entertainment called social benefit storytelling, which allowed people's participation inside a story to do real good in the real world. Released across the web, mobile and music, it became the most ambitious cross-platform story ever launched. And this is the story they told. Recording artist Nadira X puts her career on hold to build a library for an elementary school in Zambia. But British-based multinational Blackwell-Briggs halts construction of the library to make way for an oil pipeline. Nadira uncovers a document proving the company's claim to the land is false and sets out on an epic journey to London to expose their fraudulent actions. Moved by Nadira's mission, people from around the world joined an ancient secret society known as the Conspiracy for Good. To help her cause, they watched her story across 21 webisodes as they guide her in real time from Zambia to London, deciphering clues and hacking the Blackwell-Briggs website. When Nadira arrives in London, the action bursts from the web and onto the streets, with 4 weeks of real-world gameplay and live theatre where conspirators take part in digital scavenger hunts to solve the story's mystery and celebrate the day's action with secret underground concerts. In the end, urgent calls via social media networks result in flash mobs that overwhelm security forces and topple Blackwell's corrupt CEO. And to complete Nadira's mission, the audience used in-story tools to help her build a real library in Zambia, $1 and one book at a time.
You can't stop me. No, you can't stop me. If you're not a man. You can't stop me. Not at all. You can't stop me.
The Conspiracy for Good. Are you a member?
So this kind of storytelling really proved this sort of theory that people will come out of their homes and engage in a narrative, and especially if it has meaning for them and meaning in the real world. And while this was a pilot, it was a very big and ambitious project with a very small footprint. We did it all in the streets of London, and it was actually a very small footprint. But the idea is to, as I said, we took an idea from between London and Zambia, but the goal now with something like this would be to take it big and take it global and make it something that you could engage in no matter where you are. And I'm really fascinated by how that kind of narrative can exist in the world. And I've come to really believe that one of the secrets is through big, ubiquitous global brands that now have ways of reaching an audience. Some of these brands have Facebook pages with 15 to 20 million people on them, and that's a giant audience waiting to be told some kind of story and to be engaged. And so audiences can now engage with a brand and engage with a narrative, and the brand can actually be responsible for sponsoring this. And you can create a story world where a narrative has a linear story, it has mobile content, it has the audience participating through creating narrative. The causes then push the narrative as well, and so do the brands. And you can engage in a very light way and touch just it as a light kind of consumer, or if you're into a deep kind of dive, you can have a very deep experience with something like this. And the result is that the consumers and the brands collaborate in these really unique ways, and it makes the world a better place and makes the brand happier. And so this fascination with brand and how brands interact with storytellers really took a very kind of unique turn on my last show, Touch, where we created a project that was as a result of a direct relationship between a brand and me. I went to the AT&T labs to sign my life away and an NDA, and went and looked at all of this stuff that they have that's 5, 6, 10 years out. And I started to realize that this technology that they have could actually help me tell a better story, or a real story. And so the relationship between me and AT&T was then sort of brokered into the show, and we created a kind of a unique project based on that. So I'll show you that.
In early 2011, AT&T signed a product integration deal with Fox for their highly anticipated series, Touch, so that characters would use AT&T branded technology for a certain number of seconds, a classic model that's been around since the dawn of television. We thought it was time to break the model. Presenting Daybreak, a fully immersive multimedia spin-off series launched from a traditional network show. Daybreak tells the story of a mysterious object called a dodecahedron, which gives people extraordinary abilities, a metaphor for AT&T's technology. The dodecahedron first made its appearance in key scenes of Touch, followed by this cryptic commercial.
Find the truth. The answer lies in the dodecahedron.
Millions of Touch viewers were directed to Daybreak.com, where they found numerous dodecahedrons. By clicking the larger objects, viewers discovered Daybreak, the story of an unassuming everyman drawn into a global conspiracy.
Harding was murdered last night. You were the last person to see him alive.
And your father was on the verge of a major breakthrough. It's like nothing you've ever seen on this earth. And he started to believe he was being followed.
He's here.
Further exploration of Daybreak.com rewarded viewers with numerous websites and other ancillary content. But it wasn't enough just to show interesting technology. We needed people to use it. So we built a James Bond-style app used in the story by a secretive underground group. The app allowed viewers to dive even deeper by taking part in online and real-world missions using each of the AT&T technologies. Image recognition, sound recognition, GPS tagging, and more. By weaving the Daybreak story into Touch, we connected millions of audience members to a deeply immersive story about the magic and power of technology, all of which increased AT&T's perception as a technology leader by 82%. Daybreak, more than just product placement, idea placement.
So these unique ways to collaborate with brands, and in some ways it's sort of going back to the source, when 50 years ago you had the Texaco Hour or Mutual of Omaha Presents or those kinds of things, where I think we are starting to see the role of the brands playing a much bigger part in all of this. And it doesn't mean that the traditional form of storytelling at all is going to die. It's just that there are some unique and interesting new funding ideas out there for storytellers. And as a writer and a storyteller, we're living in absolutely amazing times with all of these incredible opportunities for unique kind of partnerships, whether that's with brands or with networks on all of these new platforms that are emerging out there. But in some ways, I'm really fascinated by what may be the most unique partnership, and that is the idea of partnering with the audience and defining my role as a storyteller now as no longer creating story for them, but creating story with an audience. And I think it's a unique idea that's now possible to allow an audience in. And I have a last clip here that I'll show you. It's just a short little clip from Marshall McLuhan, who is the father of kind of the modern idea of, sociology of media. And this clip is from well over 50, it's got to be over 50 years old. So let me show you this.
If the audience can become involved in the actual process of making the ad, then it's happy. It's like the old quiz shows. They were great TV because it gave the audience a role, something to do.
So, and in conclusion, listen, my journey, as I said, will continue exploring all of these new things. And for me, it's really about relevance. It's not just the word relevant as in staying up with the changing, the sort of ever-changing landscape of technology, but it's about being relevant and being relevant in the world and seeing yourself as a part of a solution to sort of bigger issues out there, and a way to have meaning in story and allow audiences to have meaning along with you. So as I said, my journey continues, and I welcome all of you to join me in that journey. Thank you very much.